All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining. I'm excited about what we're going to talk about today. We know that AI is at the forefront of everybody's mind, and so something that I talked with both Nick and John about was, gathering a group of people where we kind of get multiple different perspectives about how that's influencing the industry and kind of where things are headed. John and I had a lot to say about that on a recent podcast on his coding chats podcast. And I wanted to open the floor up also, like I said, to newer folks. And so hopefully, there's Ebimene. He is just joined. Okay, you've been added to the stage. So we have Ebimene and William and Shruti. They are all newer engineers. I wanted it to be people who are actively full-time employed, so folks who are in their early years. So all these folks are, I think, less than 5 years in engineering. And so I wanted to give all of them a chance to sort of share first what their experience is like. And we'll start with them, and then we'll go around to Nick and John and myself, and we'll share a little bit about what our experience and thoughts are. But we wanted to, I always like that's an Amazon thing, right? Jeff Bezos says that the newest person goes first, so that they're not feeling like they're following on from the more experienced folks. So meanwhile, this is very much meant to be an AMA, and so AI is, of course, the topic du jour. And so, folks, if you want to start adding comments in the chat on LinkedIn, then we'll get to those comments and we'll take those as they come. So, without further ado, I will. How about, let's see, Shruti, are you comfortable starting?
Sure.
Okay. So thoughts. So starting off, first question is just sort of set some ground level ground, just content around, what is your anecdotal experience, so far with AI, and your thoughts about what everybody's talking about, all the hype and where the industry's headed.
Sure. I don't know if I have an anecdotal experience. I can talk about my general experience
Yeah, sure.
with AI, and my view of how I use AI.
Yeah.
So as you said, I have about 3 years of experience, and definitely for me, I use AI more as like a rubber duck or something I go to kind of course correct or look at something that I'm not really sure about, right? To double check my work. I think I'm very conservative in using AI in the sense that I don't want to become dependent on it and make it write most of my code. I think I'm cautious and more conservative in that sense. I don't think I'm the best user of AI. I'm sure that there are people that use AI more effectively than I have, for sure. I've played around with a bunch of different tools like Cursor, ChatGPT. I think GPT I use more for my personal, make me itinerary for, I don't know, if I'm going on a trip. But Cursor or Claude, I'll use more for coding and stuff like that. So I would say my view is more so I want to focus on my coding skills, and then use AI more as a helper tool.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great. I think that's a great outlook. So I appreciate that. So Eva Mene, why don't you jump in and share a little bit about what your experience has been like? If you're able to. There we go.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep, yep, you can.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
My background is a bit, noisy, so that's
Oh,
why I'm just looking for a very good place so that it won't be. So yeah, I'm a software engineer. Basically, I've worked more as a front end engineer. Integrating various kind of APIs, CMS. Basically, in my team, they actually believe in creating content for some other companies too. So I do that, and then also do some basic integrations with AI. For example, we built a kind of like online searching tool using Claude's API. So in my day-to-day work, I use AI to kind of like enhance my performance. Sometimes, to be very sincere, I feel like this thing is kind of like making me feel lazy, or I'm kind of like depending on it, where I don't know, like that's more reason why I'm also like very excited about this opportunity to join this thing, to see how some other people are also like, what is the attitude towards AI, because I use it basically like before AI, or before the advent of Chat GPT, I think in 2020 or so, when it came out, we were using Stack Overflow, and it wasn't really like that. For example, if you are working on something and then you have a bug, you want to go to Stack Overflow, you have to read through some other people's solutions, and then the iterative process there, then you get a solution, you try to understand and then use it. But these days, I think I no more use Stack Overflow. Literally, when I have a problem, I try to like take it to, but I use Claude and V0. I don't know if you know that, but that's a versatile solution that is
Yep.
very good with building AIs and things that, I mean, UI user interfaces. So these days, when I have some development challenges and I want to check out for the reason for an error message, I go straight to V0. I no more use Stack Overflow. In fact, if I'm to plot the graph, the usage of Stack Overflow has drastically reduced. And sometimes when I want to, like, if I have a feature I'm trying to work on and I need to read some documentation, sometimes I brainstorm with AI. So basically, I'm more like using it as a senior that I have in my office, where I go, I want to work on this, or what do you think? If you have to do this, how do you do this? How are you going to approach this? Then from the response,
Sure.
and then I try to like um add my own input, and then I get something out of it. But I won't lie, like sometimes I feel like I'm not supposed to do this. This is going to make me weak. This is going to make me become a weaker engineer. These are some kind of internal battles that I fight while I use this thing. But honestly, it has really boosted my productivity by a very great margin, because I do things faster. I have,
Sure.
I complete features faster, but then I have that internal battle. So this is why I will be very excited to hear from other engineers and how they approach it. Thank you, everyone. And I will share more if there's any need
Yeah.
for me to share again. But this is
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
much what I can share.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. And yeah, we definitely want to have people take questions as they come in. So that's for sure. That's the idea. Okay, great. So William, let's hear a little bit about your perspective and experience with all of it.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, where can I start? Started working around like a bit over a year ago, full time, right? A few internships before.
Awesome.
I'd say AI is pretty central in actually everything we do. Specifically in my workflow, I use it pretty much all the time. So whether it's searching internal docs, we have you can use AI, for example, searching internal docs, searching your Slacks as well. We have I have a series of automations as well, in different Slack channels, for example, to for AI to kind of like summarize things. We're going to start meeting notes, AI transcription, summarize that, all the meeting notes, even software development in general. So typically speaking, I don't give much critical code when it comes to the LLMs, but when it comes to internal tooling, where for example we need to just host a web page, debug pages, I typically just vibe code it, for example. When it comes to implementation ideas, for example, I like to bounce off conversations almost with the AI, and then I like to go and cross check it, chat it through with some seniors, right? But it gives me some good high level ideas that I haven't really thought of before, and I think for me it's just a huge boost in unblocking me, especially when that friction comes with information, right? So for me, I use it as a very faster search tool, say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a great way to think about it. So I guess let's see. In terms of you know, the rest of us, myself, John, Nick, I'm trying to think. Like, Nick, why don't you lead and share a little bit about what your thoughts are here?
All right, no pressure, no pressure. Yeah, so I am an engineering manager at Microsoft, so I'll kind of give a couple of different thoughts here because I can talk about sort of use case at work for me, and then how even I see my engineers kind of leaning into it. And then I do program outside of work, but at work I do not. So I can share a little bit about how I'm using it from a development perspective. But um, I work at Microsoft, so Copilot having summaries and things like that is like just tremendous. We have some more advanced agents than that we can kind of like link up with Copilot to help effectively like research. Like, and you've probably seen similar tools where it's not just like the chat model, but you can ask it like, "Hey, I need deep analysis." So we have that kind of thing. So I've used that for doing things like post incident reviews to just to collect a ton of data, kind of bring that all together. It's I would say that it's not something that I just take the output of that, and this is a theme with like all of my AI usage. It's not just copy paste the output, cover my eyes and hope it's good, but it's like it
Yeah.
takes you like 80% of the way there. Obviously, I'm just kind of making up a number there, but it's far enough along where I can go edit, tack on, and it's enough of a time saver that way. Engineers on my team are using like Copilot in their IDE, so a lot of us are using Visual Studio. Having Copilot there
Yep.
is awesome. And kind of getting to the point now where a lot of tooling, I would say, we're moving in the direction of having like chat integration and things like that. So like it's a pretty common thing, I would say, especially at larger companies. You need help with something. Hey, other team, how does what's the status of this? Server service issues, things like that. So it's like an on-call kind of helping tool. We're moving a lot in that direction, which is super cool. Because if you've been on call like as a platform team and you're helping other teams, it's like the same types of questions come in and you're like, man, I wish I could just not have that happen and just give people all the information they need.
Yep.
Moving in that direction, which is cool. And then just quickly a note for me in my development, because I have been programming for a long time now, I would say I am using AI more to like vibe code through things or like sort of to plow through a lot of development. And if I'm moving into areas that I'm not familiar with, I will spend more time kind of like trying to learn a little bit more. But there are things like some front end development. I'm like, I just need to kind of move through this. And I don't have a tremendous interest in getting into the weeds. So sometimes some UI stuff gets vibe coded, but like I have some agents running locally on my computer on a different screen right now, trying to put some stuff together, integration test frameworks for some stuff I'm building. But it's a lot of hand holding, and that's okay for me because I can kind of guide it to go do what I need. So trying to use it a lot.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have to pause on that because that's so interesting to me. I can't help it. When that's one area where, so at first I was very reluctant about that sort of vibe coding, sort of unsupervised. And I found that I interrupt it and need to help it so much that I'm really hesitant about multi. But it sounds like you're doing multiple agents. Is that right? I want to just make sure I hear that right.
Yeah, and so like depending on the scenario, right? So at this moment, I have like I was changing a bunch of code for like a personal project, and I have a need for integration test suites to kind of get migrated over to a new pattern. But you're absolutely right. Like especially with like an agent swarm, it's kind of like if you've worked with an agent running and you're like, oh man, it feels like it's not quite smart enough to do what I need. It's like that, but times 8 now. So it's not like you have like 8 really, really smart agents. It's kind of like 8 agents where you're like, oh, it's kind of rough. So they get going, but what's nice is that if I catch it early, like I can kind of pause it and say like, absolutely don't do that. Save a memory of that, and I'll continue on. So a lot of guiding though.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, I want to go last though. So, John, I'd love to hear your perspective on all of this. I know it's interesting to me too because you're in a teaching space, and so that's really relevant here, where people are able to use AI to, like, something that a lot of the folks have shared, right? Is that they um, they're able to use it as a rubber duck. They're able to use it to help explain things kind of highly contextual. I mean, to me, that's a big advantage or a big unlock that we have, with AI. And then you're trying to get, like people have said, multiple of our folks have said, they don't want to become too dependent on it. And so you're more in the business of helping people to, you know, unlock those skills where you're really getting into the depths of understanding things. So I'm curious how it all sort of fits together for you. You know, love to hear your take.
So, to answer that question, I guess for most of the people I see that are using it and trying to do some of the coding challenges,
Yeah.
it's stopping them getting that level of understanding. It's
Mhm.
meaning they get a superficial solution that at first glance looks like it, passes the test and meets the requirements,
Yep.
but they're not getting deeper, they're not getting that understanding, and quite often the code doesn't quite do what it should do.
Mhm.
So from that point of view, I think when people use it as a crutch, it is depriving them of the opportunity to learn.
Yep.
Now, again, we could level the same criticism at tutorials and just following along copying code from a book. If you don't take the time to understand it, you don't take the time to get familiar with the material, you won't learn it from a book or a tutorial either. So it's not that AI is bad for that, it's just that it can make it appear that you've done something and you've generated all this code a lot quicker and a lot more smoothly than if you had to copy it from a tutorial or copy it from a book. So from that point of view, I'd prefer to see people using it less when they're learning and focusing more on getting stuck in.
Yep.
The other problem I'm seeing is still an awful lot of people don't know how to start a project from scratch. They don't know how to sit down and think through a project. So again, if they use it as a crutch from that and it generates something, they don't really know then if what it's produced is good or bad. So they're not in a position to assess it and evaluate whether the outcome is good. So again, it can appear to be, I think, a lot more productive than it is for some people. And I think if you've got more experience, it potentially has a chance to be far more powerful because you know what good looks like. You can direct it a bit better. You can be a bit more focused. You can pick out where it's providing value and where it's not.
Yeah.
And I think if you don't have that experience, you run the chance of getting something that looks good but is potentially quite bad or dangerous. And I'm sure we've all seen the memes about things that are exposing all sorts of credentials and bits of security. And if you like click and view source or go into the developer console on a web page and get everybody's secrets. So
Absolutely.
there's definitely a balance to be found. It can be very, very useful. I think one of the things that disappoints me with AI, because AI is of personal interest, is this focus on LLMs and coding. And as we've mentioned, there's a bunch of other tools that are really useful, like summarizing meetings and getting the key points for that. That's very, very useful because most people suck at meetings and don't record the minutes. So if you weren't there, or you're on holiday or sick or whatever, actually having that record or going back and substituting that into your ADRs or whatever records you use, so you at least got an idea of why a decision was made and when it was made, is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Well, things like this and doing the podcast that you mentioned earlier, Brian,
Yeah.
AI is incredibly powerful for editing that and producing, a podcast or producing useful material for tutorials. So there's an awful lot of stuff that AI can be really useful for in our field that isn't just producing code. And we seem to kind of, or the people pushing AI have glossed over that in that, hey, LM will replace software engineers, rather than all these amazing things that it can do to help us become more efficient at our jobs.
Yeah. And I love Nick's example too about the on-call scenario because we have that, of course. So I'm an engineering lead at Salesforce. And so, we have that rotation as well. And, the interesting part there to me is, every this is maybe unpopular because I'm never a proponent of no documentation, but sometimes a heavy documentation culture eventually equates to zero documentation because if the docs are 1,000 pages long, then they might as well be zero, right? And so because nobody's going to know where to start, but AI is really good at finding context in that ocean of potentially relevant stuff that's in the run book when you're on call and that sort of thing. So I think that's super powerful, and I love Nick's example. So, so I guess for those who don't know, I'm an engineering lead at Salesforce. easiest way to explain it is that my product is sort of a competitor to Next.js, very popular if you're in the front end world. So I'm the lead there on a Salesforce Commerce specific version of an AWS Lambda runtime. So that's kind of me and my day job. On the side, I have a company, Meet Near Me, which is a startup that I started, and I have a few engineers. So I've had a chance to see up close some of the impact on newer engineers of, with AI, because I am actively mentoring and have a number of folks that are on my team. And so, anyway, so all that to say, I took the same trajectory as the newer folks. Like when I started, I was kind of early on this and very interested in it, probably 15 months ago. I don't know, whatever it was, a while ago. And I was very active about, in the prehistoric days when we didn't have Cursor, and I had to actively put, code snippets into Chat GPT and see what it would tell me. And so it was interesting because I know, even before Cursor integration or the IDE level integration was really strong, I was learning Golang that way. I talked a lot about that on John's recent podcast on coding chats. And so I had that kind of slower intro, and I've only in the past, I would say 3 to 4 weeks, really been experimenting more with unassisted or mostly unsupervised, letting the agent just kind of go nuts, which is what it wants to do. And, I find that the speed of comprehension for reading is absolutely critical. Similar, Nick has kind of started to say this. It's like, I had yesterday, it happened where it's like I had specifically quarantined this script, which was like a subset of the functionality. And I said, go run this script. And once we get this working, we're going to fold it into the main monolith API. And it runs the script, somehow misses that it gets a 500 back, and then it starts to it's gonna, okay, well, now we're gonna rewrite your whole code base. Stop, don't do that. So anyway, that being said, though, it is it's super interesting because I think that there's a study I saw recently. I didn't, this is more like I read the headline, but I'm really interested in essentially, people think that they're 50% more productive, but a study found that they were 20% less productive, with AI. And I think that really, I can relate to that because I think a lot of it has to do with that sort of dopamine cycle of like feeling like you got a hit, you know what I mean? Like you're in the casino, it's like, ooh, I got this working and I didn't have to understand it. And I think that's, our minds inherently avoid friction, which is exactly what John's trying to impart to people, how to, and like all of Nick, John, and I have all been in this 20 plus years. I'm 20. I think Nick's probably longer. I know John's 30 or something like that. Nick, how long have you been in engineering?
Professionally, like 14 years. So
okay, cool.
So not 20, not for me.
Oh yeah, sorry, whatever. Well, that's okay. He's gone past me, so it doesn't. How long doesn't matter. You know what I mean? But that being said,
well, my hairline shows it. So
yeah. So, but anyway, I think like that's the big lesson, right? For me, being in this 20 years, is that you're always going to spend time on the things you don't think you're going to, if that makes sense, right? Like the easy parts that are easy, I always tell people, imagine that all you do all day long is work with things that are broken and they're never fixed, because as soon as you fix them, then you're fixing the next thing, right? There's like, if you're lucky, there's 30 seconds of celebration there. You know what I mean? And so when everything's always broken and you're always fixing it, that's kind of, that's an interesting problem, I think. And so when you look at AI and the fact that you can quickly, churn through lots of stuff that is subtly broken, that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out with people who are doing that in production. So, I had a post on LinkedIn that got a bunch of likes about, like, I had someone presumably vibe code some, or like use some AI and not understand, how an HTTP handler in Go was returning nil. And so like I had this rare scenario where it would return 500. And this was, on a production project as my side project, which had real paying users. And so an example of how it impacted, right, real users and a real business. So you have to be really careful, and it's really tempting to just allow for this large amount of code without really combing through it, right? I'm affected by that just like everybody else. So anyway, that's kind of my take. So let's go ahead and jump into questions here. So let's see. Looking for questions. Rubber ducking is a great use case. Okay, so we've got Jose, I think Luis. He says, I am a senior software, and I think this is from Nick from your channel, perhaps, a senior software engineer with a strong background in C#, and I'm really interested in integrating it into my career, AI into my career. However, I often feel lost about where to start. Do I need to switch to Python to be effective in this field? What should I focus on learning? Is there a path for someone like me who loves being a developer but doesn't want to become a data scientist right now? I'm studying more the core concepts, but I want to stay close to development and build practical AI-powered applications. So Nick, we'll give that one to you.
Sure thing. Yep, I put a response in the chat, but I think this is kind of worth talking through because I think this is a really common one that I see a lot. And the way that I look at this is actually almost answered in this person's question, which was like, I'm interested in AI, I'm interested in integrating it, but like I don't think I want to be a data scientist necessarily, right? And I don't want to oversimplify this, but I'm about to. So the way I look at this is that if you want to be on the cutting edge of like creating new types of AI systems, right? So like the fact that we have people that are training models, like basically building the parts of LLMs and things like that, that the rest of us are consuming and using. I think if you want to be at the forefront of that, there's probably a lot more science involved. And I'm not saying that science isn't helpful in other aspects to this, but I think you probably need a lot more science to be pushing that. So, for example, people will talk about LLMs having a limitation where they're saying, like, I don't think that's going to achieve Gen AI. Like, you probably need something else that can do that. I don't know what that something else is, but I think that if you were spending a lot more time in the science aspect, you'd probably be, a lot more familiar with some of the other systems that might be coming to the forefront or helping build those. On the other side, though, like if you're interested in integrating AI into the things that you're building, the answer that I provided was like, I think if we zoom out a little and have like more systems level thinking, it's just like another thing that we can start to integrate. It's like, when should you be using queues? When should you have these other types of things that you might put into your systems? If you're like, if I have some type of AI technology, whether that's like RAG or some other system, maybe you are building some search functionality, and maybe that makes sense to now go integrate RAG into your system so that it can effectively look for different types of content. Like that would be one use case. But I think the way that I look at this is that if you're trying to build AI into the systems that you're using, you don't need Python necessarily. You don't need the science background. I have neither of those things, and I'm integrating AI into the stuff I'm building. Can those be helpful? Sure. I just don't think that it like is a necessary requirement. So you don't have to pivot your whole tech stack to go, oh, if I don't switch to Python, I'll never be able to integrate AI into what I'm building.
And Go's catching up. I've noticed they're behind, but catching up. Like like Python used to be, all the tooling was there, but I've found just in the 12 months I've been working with a bunch of this stuff that the tooling with Go is coming up from behind, hopefully, which I'm excited about. I know John's excited about that.
Don't confuse AI with LLMs. So AI is a massive field, and there's a lot more to it. And you can build a lot of AI technology in any programming language.
Yeah.
We started off things like Prolog, languages that support AI development decades ago.
Yeah.
Most of the production AI I shipped over about the 6 years that I did was in MATLAB or C++.
Yeah.
Or C, and a little bit of Python. So you can build these solutions in anything. Again, we're in danger of narrowing AI down to just being using LLMs, and it's a much bigger field.
Yeah, no, that's a really good call out. Well, so as we talk through that, I think this next question I want to jump into. So Steven said, it's an interesting question. How deep down understanding is needed? Do we need devs still understanding assembly to be effective, or are we okay with them focusing on the solution more than the process of being technically competent? And I love this question because I think like I want to actually go around to multiple people on this one. And John, like I think I'd like you to start because this is that hard question where you're focused on getting people to understand all of the building blocks. But like I posted yesterday on LinkedIn, you're never going to get down to the point of all, right? You're not going to like figure out how to turn sand into silicon probably, but how do you manage that? I'm curious, John, because when you're focused on people mastering like what we've identified as core competencies, right? Like core systems, that should be understood. It's like, how do you go about ruling out certain things as not qualifying when you know that it's impossible for a human to actually learn all of it? I'm interested in your thoughts there.
So I generally think you need to go one or two levels below the level that you're dealing with. So, if you're, say, a front-end developer, make sure you understand HTTP and that HTTP is built on TCP and that's built on top of IP. So depending where you want to argue, that's 2 or 3 levels below. But again, the classic example I see in the back of this is I worked with a team a few years ago that were building stuff calling an API, and it's a RESTful API over HTTPS. They could not understand that if they do 1 million queries, some of those queries will fail and the system could be up and working because there's a network in the way and they're going over the public internet. That is not reliable, and it's fundamentally an unreliable infrastructure that's designed to be resilient on the basis of things changing on the network and potential impact by outside forces. And if you make millions of HTTP requests, some of those will fail. Doesn't mean that the end service you're hitting is down. It's just the nature of networks. But they hadn't understood that the code they were using under the hood, it looked like an API to them, was making HTTP calls and going over a network. And they needed to build a bit of resilience in for that. Now, sure, they don't need to go and understand all of IP. They don't need to understand HTTP, TCP. But they need to have enough of an understanding that, hey, this API is making calls over HTTP. That's running over a network. Networks are fundamentally unreliable. We cannot assume every call succeeds.
Yep.
So there's a couple of levels beneath where you are so that you can understand the failure modes, and so that if something goes wrong, you can start looking into that and start debugging it and understanding it.
Yeah.
Not down to assemble for most people. Most of us aren't going to need to go that low.
Yeah. Well, I want to give more space here for the folks like Shruti and Will. I'd love to hear from you two on this one as well, in the sense that specifically, I'm curious, as you approach your own learning journey, right? And I'm assuming you're constantly confronted, like me, for the last 20 years with things that you don't understand. How do you narrow down like where you want to focus? And then how do you assess sort of like where you want to dig in next? I think like what's that process been like for, and specific technologies is like great, speak from where you are, right? Like, if that's a specific tool or technology, that's totally fine. I'm curious to hear what you guys think.
I think just to clarify, I guess, right? So, I mean, going deeper into what exactly, right? We're talking, I don't know, like technical concepts or just,
I guess I mean, like, I'm more thinking about the day to day of the work of engineering, and I'm thinking, I don't know, are you more back end or are you more front end? What language are you in? And then, there are frameworks that sit on top of languages, and like, where have you found that? How do you go about the process of deciding, kind of like, where, like John would say, be curious. You know what I mean? It's like how do you determine where to let your curiosity guide you in terms of sort of like where you want to go, branching out beyond what you're currently doing, I guess.
Oh yeah, like I work a lot on backend, but at the same time, it also involves a lot of like algorithmic development, right? So a lot of times, again, I think the contrary, I use AI to go deep. Actually, in a lot of cases, I'm having a full conversation and trying to go deeper. Why is this? Why is this the case? Why is this the case?
Yeah.
And I just keep asking it questions over and over until we keep getting deeper. And obviously, you ask for citations, or you just straight like Google it. Just it makes up some fake content here and there. But I use it kind of like a schizophrenic like chat, pretty much.
Yeah.
I just keep going deeper and deeper. Like one example is optimizing the runtime for some critical code, right? You put it this way, we need it under maybe like under a second, and it's currently at 10 seconds. So I just think of, hey, here's what are some general ways to improve it, and I can go deeper. Why do you think this is the case? Why should we change the code to this, and kind of go down deeper? Another case too is using it for surveys. So you can use AI to get a huge breadth, and then you can use that breadth to select some certain concepts. So say I want to create a search across different many different strings, right? You do something like a try, or you can look up some other cooler structures like BK trees, right? So I use it to kind of understand like what are the trade-offs here and there, and then I go and like look at some sources on Google afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So a little bit, if it's not private, your work, like when you talk about deciding between different data structures in that example there, what's the customer facing use case or the impact? What is it that you're trying to accomplish there?
I'm not sure I can't say, but
okay, that's fine.
you say at least it's you can think of it like translating between two different lexicographic like two different languages almost in a sense. So
Okay.
it's something you see day to day, and for some reason translation is not as clear as you think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Makes sense. Cool. Shruti, what are your thoughts? I'm curious how you think through this sort of like approach and like what you're going to learn next, and sort of how you talked a bunch earlier about how you don't want to sort of become weakened or dependent on it, right? So what's that
Yeah.
look like in practice?
Sure, that's a good question. I think this is something I think about as I am like in the earlier part of my journey as an engineer. Definitely like depth first, or like we talk about like T-shaped engineers, about where I want to find like my niche. I definitely haven't found it. I am a full stack developer, so my approach to learning is learning by doing. I enjoy like getting my hands dirty, as they say, and trying on new technologies and seeing what works for me. And I think for me, it's learning by need. A lot of the times, the skills that I pick up is like, hey, this ticket requires me to go deeper into this technology, or I'm curious about how this is working. If there's something I'm using, and I'm like, oh, okay, like how do they do that? How is that working in the back end? So it's majority of the time it's curiosity, or if it's a need for the ticket I'm working on, and interest in certain things like AI if I'm using it. And like Will said, is it Will? Sorry. Yeah. So like I will use AI and like ChatGPT to kind of learn more and go deeper and ask the whys. There is a little bit of like distrust in me in the answers I get back, so I always verify. I think that's something that like is because of the hallucinations that I've seen. So I'm like always double checking. Trust but verify is like my approach to using it. It's not like I trust a senior engineer if they tell me to try something more than I trust ChatGPT when it tells me to try something. So I think I prefer if it's a human being telling me like, hey, like I've tried it. These are the caveats. But it is good to use ChatGPT. Even if I face the caveats, I think I'll learn more. I think for me, it's like failing, trying. That's where I'm learning.
Yeah, and I think the potential here, when we think about rubber ducking, like you're saying, sort of both of you are sort of highlighting that using it as a conversational tool, almost a sort of rubber duck, to sort of, ask a lot of questions, why this, and then why that in response, and so on. I had that experience, like I said, learning Golang, and from zero, and it was like it worked really well for me. I think that the more you're on the paved path, the less it's an opinion, and the more it's like, hey, here are the data structures, right? Like, data structures are a tool, right? And you, like, pick one of them, and here's what all the tools in the toolbox do. You can ask all the questions about the tools. That's like a well paved path. And then as soon as you get into like gray areas where it's like, well, do I want like a document database, or do I want a SQL database? You know what I mean? Do I want NoSQL or SQL? And it's like, well, you're probably always going to have things that push you toward both, right? And it's deciding on which is the more important factor. So those kinds of things are where, it requires some intuition, I think, because it's like, well, which is more important to the customer? Is it like how is it reads or writes? Like, what's the use case? You know what I mean? Which is more important, just in that example, So anyway, but cool. Okay, let's I think it was good to camp out on this. I wanted to, get a couple takes. So let's keep rolling through some other questions. This makes you, most of the time is wasted debugging, generated code. Yeah, that happens. Fun fact, we built F5. Okay, hey everyone. I'm looking for, feel free to call them out if other folks have specific questions. I can find them and highlight them. Okay, here's one. So, web developer with 6 years of experience here, thinking to switching into a field that would get less impacted by AI. Do you think that AI had or will have impact on embedded software development? Oh, embedded. Okay, nice. All right. Well, anybody can just jump in here.
I think it will have a lot less impact on embedded software development, at least from the code generation point of view, and people claiming it replaced them, because you're far more hardware specific, you're far more niche, and there's a hell of a lot less training data.
Yep.
There's a lot of embedded developers out there, and still number in the millions, but there's many, many more millions of web developers out there. So the training data that's available for LLMs to generate code is much bigger, and there's far less common stuff in the embedded things. There's a lot of common patterns in the problem solving, but there's a lot less common stuff in the code and the solutions that are being built.
Yeah, absolutely. If other folks have someone to jump in, feel free. That being said, also, it's like I don't want to comment too much on embedded. I don't know about others. John might be the only one today who, I don't know. If Nick, do you have much embedded? I don't have any embedded.
Just from early in my career, from internships. But yeah, like my comment that I added back to this individual was essentially like, I think I don't, the framing of the question, and sorry, I'm not like trying to pick on the question. This comes up a lot to me. So I don't like the framing of the question, only because it seems to imply, like, this is my take when I read this kind of thing, is that like I'm trying to look for the one spot in software engineering that's going to be safe because all the others are going to be replaced. That's generally how I interpret this kind of thing. And I know it's not exactly how it's said, but I feel like this is the mindset that we're trying to look for a safe haven. And my take on this is, like, I think that all of software engineering is going to be impacted. Basically, like, every single role in the world will be impacted. But the point that I added back to them was that impacted does not equal replaced. And I just want to keep reminding people that, because I know that what we see, like, in media, you'll see, tech executives kind of, it seems like the narrative being pushed is like, we don't need junior developers. Look, all this AI is writing all this code. Like, it's just like, it's far too much, like, I don't know. It's just like a big media push, I find, and it ends up being like, if you look at how like YouTube headlines work, or any article, sorry, YouTube titles or article headlines or anything, it's very sensationalized because it works. It makes you click it, it makes you watch it, it makes you read it. It makes, it's appealing to the right audience because they're getting people to go look at their material. And to me, that's kind of dangerous because it continues to push this narrative that that I don't think is quite accurate. Do I think that there are parts of software engineering that will become more effective to have AI and LLMs do? Of course. But personally, I think the stuff that it's going to be especially good at is all the stuff I certainly don't want to do. I've already mentioned, like, I'm having AI right now as we're talking do test suite migration. I absolutely don't want to do that. I was happy to be part of the creation of what that framework looks like. I don't want to go migrate all these tests. It needs to get done. I don't want to do it.
Yeah, I think the thing I agree. And when you talk about people worrying about, so a couple things here. One, the idea of, so I have it on good authority, which I won't disclose how, that when people say AI is writing X% of the code, what that means very literally is that in Cursor, there is instrumentation that logs the number of lines of suggested code and how many times you click accept or reject, and that's the calculation. So when I hit accept and I delete 70% of what was there, the AI no longer wrote 70% of that code, right? So that's a big agenda that I happen to know that that's how these companies are measuring, and it's obviously not quite accurate. It's marketing headline, and so that's the first thing. So then the other part that I would just add to that, similar to what Nick was saying, I think, like, also the bottleneck will always be human comprehension. Like, that's not going away anytime soon, right? You can generate large, massive amounts of code that have been poorly reviewed, and that will have a direct impact on the fate of your company, right? Like, if you let AI generate 100,000 lines of code and you don't take 7 days to read that, then you're not going to make it. Your company is not going to make it. So anyway, all that's just a long way of saying that I think that it's a very, very strange. I didn't anticipate this. And in my opinion, science fiction didn't really anticipate very well the idea when they talked about robots, and you see C3PO can speak 1,000 languages. There was just no time spent on the fact that, like, the sheer amount of data is like incomprehensible. No humans can speak 1,000 languages, and so your bandwidth as a human being, like, what's the most languages anybody speaks? There you go. 10, I don't know, 20. So if there's 1,000 languages, which I don't think there are, but that's Star Wars, that you're going to run into this problem where if AI can generate, which it can, more output than all of humanity has generated since the dawn of time in 12 months, you're still going to have the same problem, which is essentially like, it's now you've moved the goalpost so that it's all just review now, right? Like, humans don't get to write code anymore. Now all we do is sit and review code. And so, and you can't review code effectively if you never wrote code, which is what John's doing, is trying to teach people anyway. So it's really interesting, because I think that I didn't have this on my bingo card before it happened. The idea that, like, oh, we have this new problem. Like, if you let this thing loose on, your code base or the world or whatever you want to call it, you now have this massive amount of generated stuff, but, like, you have no idea. It doesn't mean anything. It's like people, I saw a startup that was claiming that they're doing fully unreviewed, like, they're just doing specification driven development, and the AI is writing, like, I forget if it was 300,000 or 3 million lines of code a day. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, so is it 99.9% repetition of the exact same code blocks, or is it like 99.999% exactly identical? Because the functionality needs don't require 3 million lines of code. So what the hell are you doing? You know what I mean? Like, but anyway, I don't know. That's my like long slip. Feel free, anybody to else.
There's a couple of things I'd like to add on
Yeah.
this one, Brian,
Yeah.
from a different point of view. As you say, I've been doing this for nearly 30 years. I've been writing code for over 40 years. And at least once a decade since I've been interested in computers and writing software, AI has been awesome of a technology, has been about to replace software engineers.
Yeah.
Now, at some point that may be true, but so far, all the hype in each decade that we've had, that hasn't happened. Instead, a lot of these tools have increased the demand for software engineers.
Yeah.
So I'd hypothesize it the other way. You know, in 2020, 2021, during COVID, we had a big boom in demand for software engineers. Most people couldn't hire enough software engineers to do all the projects they had.
Yeah.
So if AI is making people 30% more productive, demand for software engineers went up by about 50% in those years. Why wouldn't we be redeploying all that 30% and the extra software engineers to build all these extra projects that we want, all these extra things we had? We would be leveraging this productivity that 5 years ago we had all these ideas for that had a potential for positive ROI. We'd be building those. So it makes me cynical about the claims of the boost in productivity, and also cynical about the claims that AI is why we're laying people off.
Yeah.
I think it's more interest rates have changed and finance, and we'll come the full circle. We'll get out of this economic cycle.
Yep.
People will be looking to build and invest again. Whatever level of genuine productivity we get from a boost of AI will be used to make people more productive. And then we'll hire more software engineers and the market will grow because there'll be more things we want to do. You know, if AI ever gets close to being truly intelligent, there's going to be a lot of money to be made in things like curing cancer. And there's going to be a lot of software and hardware needed for that.
Yep.
Somebody's going to be involved in building all that. So, you know, if we get out of this economic cycle and it provides any productivity, we'll still be using it, and we'll be using it to grow the industry, grow what we can do, and be more productive and create more value.
Absolutely. And I have a feeling we might actually, I'm surprised at how little people are talking about this, but we may see hiring pick up, I think, soon, because everybody talks about the AI doom and gloom. But in fact, I think the big driver is Section 174 for anybody who's not familiar, you know, is, hey, if you spend $1 million, if you make $1 million as a startup, and you spend $1 million on 10 engineers making $100,000, forgive the numbers, and you get to write off 100,000 or 200,000 of that, and your tax bill is now hugely increased versus what it was, which is what Section 174 did. Then, surprise, surprise, you know, I heard that Microsoft paid billions extra in taxes or something like that. And so, that being said, that just got reversed, and so I think that might see some uptick in hiring, and I have a feeling that nobody's been talking about that for the last 2 years, but that's falls right in line with the valley that we've kind of been in for the last 3 years or so, you know.
So to be fair, there's been a lot of SMEs in the US talking about it, and there's been a lot of discussion of things like the pragmatic engineer covering it.
Mhm.
And I'm sure it's had a massive impact. As you say, it does mean that you are paying tax on a whole bunch of money you spent, which for a startup, you spend that money to then pay tax on it as well.
Yeah.
It massively impacts your cash flow, and this will be very negative.
Yep.
And for US startups hiring overseas, again, it was even worse. It was more like 15 or 20 years. I can't remember the numbers. Doesn't impact me being in the UK, but it's a significant impact on US startups hiring overseas. So that's going to have impacted that.
Yep.
And again, interest rates, as we say, between those two things, it has a massive impact on how affordable it is to hire people,
Yeah.
how affordable it is to invest in new projects.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's see. Does anybody see any questions that they want to highlight with? We don't have a ton more time, but we might take just one more question real quick before we call it for today.
There was one from Jonathan Barron. I'm not sure if that one comes through properly in the chat, but
It should be there. Yeah.
it said, wondering what economic or legislative, there we go, factors you think most significantly impact the cost of building, deploying, or scaling AI systems.
Yep.
And when I was thinking about answering this one, I wasn't sure. I jumped to like infrastructure on this. And I was like, that's actually outside of my wheelhouse to know. Like, there's like at Microsoft, there are lots of other people scaling out the actual infrastructure. And I am sure there is a ton of like factors like that, especially when you're thinking scale of like across the planet. So, like, for example, you need to go build a data center. It's not just, okay, where is there a warehouse that we can go lease or something? It's like you're clearing land. You need to go think about power now. Like you've seen talk about like companies like buying like nuclear power plants to go like power new data centers and stuff. So there's a whole bunch of stuff with respect to infrastructure that honestly I cannot answer, because it would be so wildly complex depending on where you're talking about in the world. So I didn't know how to answer that part. I don't know if other people want to jump in on that. And then the other part was kind of what I felt like was maybe more in our control as software developers. Like, you're integrating AI into the systems you're building. I think the thing that stood out to me the most in terms of scaling or like, a legislative factor, if I can even call it that, would be more around like data privacy. Like, how are you storing data? How is it being transmitted? Like, if I was building something, running it on my desktop, I almost don't care. I hope no one has access to my own desktop, but whatever, I don't need to encrypt things at rest or anything like that. But all of a sudden, if like John and I were building a company and we're like, hey, like, John's across the planet from me and he has different laws and legislation over in the UK versus me currently in the US. If we were like, hey, like, we're gonna have a server in both of our countries, and like, or I'm like, hey, no, John, we got to keep it in the US, and John's like, no, we should keep it in the UK. Like, these are decisions that we'd have to go figure out for what that means for other people's data. And even that, like, I don't know all the details around that, but fortunately, like, working at Microsoft, I can go consult the right people that would tell me, like, can't do that, or here's how that needs to work. So it's a pretty complicated thing for sure.
Yeah, and after that, you have to think of your customers as well, because again, if you're doing it B2B and your customers are a business that are playing in a different jurisdiction, you may have to think about how you comply with their laws and how they're impacted.
Yep.
So I've worked in telco several times, and this is a great example. Every country has different laws for telco and how you handle their data. So even if you and I were doing this, Nick, I'm in the UK, you're in the US, if we've got a customer that's, say, in Germany, you've then got to think about how you protect their data and keep it within the borders of Germany, for example. So that's a whole big issue to think about. The cost of building, deploying, and scaling AI systems or any data center, again, hardware, not my area. But I do believe that Microsoft and AWS have some great videos on this that I think are public. They certainly shared them to organizations that I've been working with that take you through the cost and the involvement and the effort that they go to in sourcing a place for data centers, thinking about how safe it is from natural disasters, access to water for cooling, access to power, access to just transport and logistics, because you need to get a lot of equipment there. You need to get compute there. You need to get replacement compute there. You need access to people to support it, all the environmental concerns. And so I believe that both those videos are shared on YouTube. So I would go and have a look for those, because they do a good job of explaining it all.
Nice. And this is a little bit of a tangent, I suppose, but I'll just briefly say that we talked earlier about embedded, and that's not something that I'm an expert on, but the other, a lot of people are in software, but what we're seeing, right, with NVIDIA being the most valuable company in the world, is that there's a need for hardware. In fact, a funny story, I lost like not a lot, a couple $100 investing in Intel, because I hoped that they would catch up, right? Because surely they've been around long enough, like they can figure out how to do this. And like, no, I'm not confident in that anymore. But that being said, you know, this whole race where all these companies that are starting up, if you look at Cursor, for example, they're losing how much for every individual that's licensed, right? And so I'm pretty sure that everyone is betting on figuring out the hardware problem, right? Essentially driving the cost of hardware way down, the cost to serve for these LLMs and tools like Cursor that use LLMs. And I mean, and Microsoft's involved in that with OpenAI, and like, that's public knowledge. But anyway, I think that is really significant here when you think about like historically, everything's been about software for so long. This is a really big shift to me in the industry, where what we're going to see is hardware is going to matter more than ever. Like power plants now matter because you have to drive down the cost to serve by making the hardware more optimal. And meanwhile, you're floating the whole thing with more power and spinning up new power plants and stuff like that. Really big change, in the industry, because historically, I've done a lot of front end, and it's like, oh, if you don't carefully architect your front end, then it won't work on a slow 3G device that's 10 years old, right? So we've had some of that, but now it's way more relevant because of just how things are shifting in the industry. So I think for me, that's super interesting to think that being a hardware engineer and there's no way NVIDIA is going to have the market capture on this forever, right? So bringing those kinds of hardware designs to other companies, power plants, these things that we haven't talked about, or I haven't much in my 20 years in the industry, are now really going to become relevant in a big way. So that's where I see a lot of opportunity happening, it just in my opinion. So anyway. But yeah, any final thoughts? Because we're a little over time, but I think we can leave it there. If anyone has final parting thoughts, we can share that. But no, I think that's probably a good place to leave it, and that's totally fine. So thank you everybody for joining, and thanks Will, Nick, Abimene, John, Shruti. I really appreciate everybody being here and jumping into this conversation, because I think it is a massive pivot, and it's really exciting and confusing at the same time. And the job has always been the same, I guess. My parting advice to folks who are confused or thinking that the industry is going away, it's like, you have to find leverage. It doesn't matter if you're a software engineer or what other job you have, right? And so leverage might move around, where the advantages might change, but adapting is, I think, key. And that's why I love what John's doing with coding challenges to help people level up. Maybe you are a hardware designer. Maybe John runs a hardware cloud. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, no, I think that it's interesting times ahead. So thanks everybody, and don't quit your job just because some CEO told you that you're redundant. All right, we'll talk to you later.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everybody.